This is a Fleet Success Show, dedicated to helping you and your fleet succeed using the experience of fleet professionals and Hall of Fame fleet legends. The show that explores how the pillars of stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management all combine to lead your fleet to success. We're glad you're here. Now, let's get into the show. Hey, welcome back for another episode of the Fleet Success Show with your hosts, Josh Turley, Marc Canton.
Hey, Josh.
Good to have you back in studio again.
Good to be back.
I'm the CEO over at RTA Fleet. If you're a longtime listener, you know who I am. But for new-time listeners, we've been here 20 years. I've been here 20 years. Company's been around for almost 50. Mm-hmm. And my big focus is on technology, management, and obviously serving the largest number of public fleets of pretty much any FMIS provider out there.
That's right.
So my big focus is on government fleets, with a little dabble of K-12, higher ed, trucking. And how do we take the lessons we know as running a business, leadership, culture, as well as just the general best practices of fleet and applying that to fleet.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, you have been in fleet for 30 years.
Oh, almost. Yeah, right around.
Yeah. As an analyst, as a fleet manager, as a consultant, and you have gotten your hands dirty with many, many, many fleets, and you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, a lot of ugly. As a consultant, they usually don't call you when things are going well. Right?
Generally speaking. Yeah.
And so it's somebody who's definitely been around and seen a lot of good fleet information.
Yeah.
And I love that you're really focused on the data.
Yes.
Show me the data and I will go through a wall, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the data is going to set you free.
Yes, it will. Amen. Amen. That is absolutely the focus.
So you just got back from, a nice little whirlwind of trade shows in November with both Fleet Forward and NAFA over at the LA Automobility Show.
Super cool.
Short is LA Auto Show. But you had a lot of great conversations with people there. For our listeners who maybe weren't able to attend, what did they miss? What were some of the things that really stood out to you from that event?
Yeah, sure. So there, obviously a couple of pieces here. Obviously, at a show like Fleet Forward, which is going to be, what it sounds like, right? It's technology. It's trying to be what's coming up in fleet. A lot of the talk is certainly EV. What are the challenges, but also what's coming around the corner. And so I'd say one of the highlights of it, I have a few, but, probably the one that jumps out to me the most was this great conversation. A couple of folks from CARB and some other representatives, gave a talk about regulation. And after that, Bradley Northrup and Chris Brown and I, Bradley's the fleet manager over in Carlsbad, California, which is near San Diego. Chris Brown is, I forget his exact title. I know he's an editor. I'm not sure if he's editor-in-chief over at Bobbitt, which is automotive fleet and many of the other fleet industry magazines, and he's involved with the events. And a gentleman, and hopefully I pronounced his name right, but I believe it's Bruce Tudor, who's actually a CARB rep. He's fairly well known in California, and to his credit, he goes to these shows and he meets with fleet managers, and he listens. I mean, he gives a lot of time to folks to hear what their concerns and their questions and, frankly, their grievances are. And so I got to sit in on a talk after a talk, right? We've talked before about how at some of these shows, the best part of the show is not necessarily the session or it's that water cooler talk. It's those conversations that are happening.
It's the session after the session.
It's the session after the session kind of a thing.
The trade show floor.
Yeah. And man, it was really neat. It was really neat. And a few topics we hit, and we'll deep dive these in another show. But, one is some of the unintended consequences and challenges that come out of regulations like CARB, right? So you have things like dealers or OEMs not wanting to sell certain kinds of vehicles because it offsets what their carbon emission requirements are. And so they just don't want to sell it. So, for example, folks in California, we've heard from several fleet managers are having a really tough time getting, medium and heavy duty trucks, diesel trucks that require air brakes and things like that. They don't make those in gas. Like, what's the solution? In the meantime, they have a use case. They may have a completely legit exemption case even within CARB, but they can't get the truck because they can't meet the numbers essentially, right, by selling that vehicle.
And we're hearing that both from public fleet. I know, like Bradley mentioned this, but then like we've heard this from private fleets as well.
Yeah.
One company, they were trying to buy from Freightliner, and Freightliner was like, well, I can't sell you that unless you also commit to buying at least one EV.
Right.
He's like, I don't need an EV. He's like, well, I'm sorry. And essentially he would have to, let's say he wanted to buy one truck, he would have to buy a second EV, park it.
Right.
So you'd have to pay basically double the cost. And that was just if the EV was double the cost. And it's not.
It's not. It's more.
It's probably, anywhere from 20 to 30% more expensive than the CFV. So he had to buy 2 trucks, one more expensive than the one he wanted to buy, just so he could use the one that he wanted to offset his, it's basically a carbon credit, right? To offset his carbon footprint.
Yeah.
And for the dealer to be able to sell that without having a fee.
Yeah.
That was news to me. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And again, unintended consequence, I think, is there, another piece that I think is key. And I've seen this now in the industry for years, but it's never really been brought well to light, which is, okay, we have this regulation. Necessarily, the nature of new technology is you're going to be dealing with startups, right? We've seen that, right? We've seen some big companies backed by major companies go out of business, right? And failing to promise to deliver.
Especially in the EV space,
Right.
We've definitely seen some EVs go belly up or they just pull out of business,
Correct. Or the conversion companies too, right?
Remember when Nikola was all the rage and that company, they had some fraud and all that stuff that went on.
Yep.
There was a lot of companies that got caught up in that. Lordstown. Thank you. Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah,
you're seeing it less because what happens is the industry matures. But we saw the same thing with the ELD mandate in trucking.
Yes.
We had all these pops. They were starting up, and what ended up happening is it's a lot like rain in the desert, right? It rains in the desert, and what happens? Weeds everywhere.
Yeah, right.
And then the summer hits, and what happens? Well, they all die because there's no more rain.
Exactly.
And the same thing was happening with the ELD mandate is all of a sudden they couldn't sustain operations. They grew too fast. They didn't have the backing, whatever. Economic hardship hit. The demand wasn't there anymore. And now they were having to go steal companies from others. They withered up and died.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you're left without your ELD company. You're out of compliance and you've got to go switch, paying double the cost if you had just gone with this other provider in the first place.
Right.
And so there is an actual risk there, especially in an environment like this, which is promoting risky behavior. It's promoting it's water in the desert. Weeds are popping up, and you have companies that aren't necessarily going to last.
Right.
Now it's just, again, this is a part of a market cycle. There's an infancy of the market cycle. There's a maturation, and then there's a consolidation.
Right.
And we're probably about that mid
somewhere
peak right now. Somewhere, right? Exactly. Rivian looks like they're a solid contender.
Yeah, they seem solid.
I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years they're not here anymore.
Would not shock me.
Right. Tesla has made it through. It's very difficult for them to make it through. And they've made it through in spite of themselves sometimes because they don't really make a good car. They make a decent car, but the manufacturing process and all that stuff, like the repair side of it, they didn't make a car like that. Not like a traditional OEM.
It's different, right? They made a car the way computer companies make computers.
Amen. Yeah, that's a great way to say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of these other players that are in the market, it's going to be interesting. Lucid Air.
Lucid's a good one. Yep.
Oh, who are some of the other big, like BYD probably isn't going anywhere because the Chinese government's behind them.
Yep.
But you have several others that could make it or they could flop, but you don't really know. There's some risk.
Right.
And that's not even talking about the heavy duty and the medium duty space.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Those all light duty sedans that were primarily heavy.
Right.
And then you've got the OEMs, right? Which aren't going anywhere, but they decide all of a sudden, hey, we're not making that OE or that EV anymore.
Right. Then you're done.
You're done.
And that's just the vehicle itself, right? What about the chargers, right?
Yeah.
We've seen that. Like that's the wild way. Obviously ChargePoint is starting to, I would argue, kind of make a name, right?
Yep.
Becoming sort of the, every industry needs the name, and they're probably out in front, let's say, for becoming that. But, nonetheless, it's that same piece. And the point that came up that I think is fair is who's protecting the fleet? And I've seen this play out in just in my lifetime, in my career, where everything was about upfitting, right? Yeah. And it was we're gonna make this truck into a hybrid.
Yep.
We're going to strip the engine out and make this chassis into a BEV. And there's a few of them that are still going strong. E-Lightning, motors that they're doing great. But you could understand a fleet's hesitancy to want to work with an organization that either A, they're not sure it's going to last, or B, like they have one building here on, let's say, North Carolina, and how do they service the guy in Wisconsin? So there's challenges, and those are legitimate challenges, and nobody's accounting for that. And obviously, I'm not knocking CARB, but that I don't think they see that as their role. I don't think I'm putting words in Bruce's mouth there, but it's got to be somebody's role, right? And whose is it? And is there coordination there, right? Because if not, then the fleet folks are the ones who are left holding the bag on that.
Well, and they've got to do all the due diligence and in an industry that they're not familiar with yet.
Yes.
And they've got to get familiar with not only the regulations, but then who are the players that can meet those regulations. And by the way, the regulations companies, typically when we've done regulations in the past, you'll see them not necessarily pick winners, but they will absolutely kind of like funnel you. Like, by the way, go talk to these people. And then all of a sudden that windfall dries up. Federal government changes hands. Now you've got a different, administration in there, and the winds of the economy shift and then they go away.
Yeah.
So the consumer protection bureaus typically are supposed to do this, but these aren't consumers. They're fleets.
Right.
They're public fleets, they're government entities, or they're private fleets, they're businesses. So yeah, who's making sure that, we're doing these government regulations, but the regulations themselves aren't creating a windfall for criminals.
Right.
We saw that with PPP. We saw that with the CARES Act. There was a lot of stuff that went on there. Heck, man, you see this with the insurance companies and the ACA, right? Like the ACA created a massive windfall for insurance companies, and yet rates keep going up.
Yeah. How does that work?
So who's out there trying to protect the businesses?
Right.
And so that's a good question.
I think that's a pretty legit one, right? That there should probably be more talk around. And I think that people managing fleets, whether it's private or government, need to be pushing back on their representatives, on their government representatives and within their local and state governments, as well as, I know NAFA is very active. And some of your other
Phil Staffer is a good one.
Yeah. We need to, I think as an industry, we need to wisen up there a little bit and maybe say, okay, fine, you're going to give us the mandate, we'll work with it. Give us the protection too, right? Or something's got to give.
As long as we don't create a moral hazard where, I can just do whatever I want because the government's going to bail me out.
And that's not right. That's a fair point. That's
we
not what
saw
I'm
that movie in 2008. Yeah. We don't want to do that again, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point too. But somewhere there needs to be balance there.
Because no one goes to school for fleet management, chances are you were never formally trained on how to successfully lead a fleet. That's where the Fleet Success Playbook comes in. The Fleet Success Playbook is your guide to building a safe, reliable, and efficient fleet that provides exceptional service. Learn all about the 4 pillars of fleet success: stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management. Get nearly 100 years of combined advice on common challenges, practical solutions, actionable tips, and real examples from fleet industry experts who have been there and done that. Visit www.fleetsuccessplaybook.com to request your free copy today.
So as you might imagine, there was a lot about that. One of the numbers that kind of blew my mind, and again, I'm not trying to take shots, but I'm just kind of thinking through it with you here, is the thought on the panel was that like 80 or 90% of the use cases are accounted for with an OEM provided EV, meaning not the aftermarket upfitter folks, right? Who are turning things into EVs.
From the factory, you can get 80 to 90% of your use cases taken care of.
And that just,
it's not true.
That made my head explode.
Not when you talk about fleet, it's not true.
It's not true in
we
fleet.
know that.
Yeah. This is something that frankly I do for a living. Our team does for a living. It's one of the work that we do is EV transition modeling, EV transition planning. And to do that properly, you need to literally line by line, every single class, every use case, every utilization level, identify what is the EV asset that is going to replace the existing asset. And you're literally checking off the boxes. Okay, it can pull enough weight. Okay, it can move enough people. Okay, the range is long enough. Okay, I can build my aerial with outriggers on it. The whole 9 yards. I got to tell you, the average government fleet is somewhere between 110 and 155 classes. There's no way 80 or 9% are covered. Maybe like on a good day, 20% are covered, So
maybe volume, like if you think about
maybe from a volume, and I haven't done that research.
Fleet or a city fleet.
Yes.
Maybe 50-50, maybe a little more than that. Maybe 70-30.
I mean,
light fleet versus heavy fleet.
Yeah. Yes. Well,
but it depends on the mix.
The mix is certainly if you have a vocational fleet, there's a much better chance. Do all electric school buses exist? Yes. Do all electric transit buses exist? Yes.
Yep.
Step vans. Okay, no problem. But think about even that light duty space, right? Like how many large SUVs? I mean, there's no EV to let's say a Chevy Tahoe, one of the most common vehicles you see in government fleets. There is no EV for a Chevy Tahoe. Now, there's workarounds. You get a pickup truck, you put a cap on it, and you do
a camper shell on a Silverado EV.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's what we do. So so that's included in my 20%, it's higher that I can reasonably give an EV for because we figure out, okay, that build works. Maybe it's not ideal, but it works, right? There's just no way. There's just no way from a use case count perspective. And I get we should weight that. But that strikes me as, what I hear when I hear that is there's a disconnect here.
Yeah.
Right? And again, I want to give this gentleman, Bruce, a ton of credit because like I said, he's clearly putting in the time and he's trying to gather information and feedback. But so far, the dot's not quite connected. Is the way I think I would like to leave it, right?
And we could make the assumption, I think the only thing we could come up with for how somebody could think 90% of the use cases are covered is if they were considering the consumer market.
Yeah. Right.
That's the only way from a volume perspective.
It's got to be a volume play. Yes. Yeah, exactly right. Because certainly Amazon now, right? If you go into your neighborhood, right? Probably most of us have seen an Amazon electric van at this point.
Yeah, the Rivian
right?
electric vans are all over the place.
No problem. And it's certainly possible that because of the quantity sold, like you said, we're hitting on a volume. It's not my intuition. It's now kind of piquing my interest. Maybe that's a future project for us to do internally and do some math around that. But nonetheless, when we're talking about what fleet managers have to deal with, they have to build for those use cases, and they got to meet the requirements, the CARB requirements. And when they go to order a vehicle, if there's no EV there, now what? Now they got to apply for exemption. And again, I want to be clear, CARB does have exemption, but you got to apply vehicle at a time for those exemptions.
Now, and I don't know if they have economic exemption, right? So maybe there is a vehicle, but it's 4x the cost. We saw that, talking to the gentleman up at Fairfield was, hey, like I could go buy that vehicle, but it was going to cost me $100 as a CFV, and now it costs me $400 as an EV.
Yeah.
Yes, there's an option.
Right.
It's 4 times the cost.
Right.
Now what?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that's part of the
I don't think so either.
play. I think it's got to be you have to be able to prove that there is not an EV. My understanding of it when I read it is, you have to be able to prove that there's not an EV available for you to buy that can do the work that the vehicle you're replacing is doing. Right. Now, more fallouts. I talk, I'm very passionate about replacement. You talk about replacement, how it mitigates so many issues. Well, think about some of the behavior that this is going to trigger. Because the CARB is written, the part we're talking about anyway, is written around acquiring a new vehicle. So it's about replacing vehicles. And now I can't get my truck that I need air brakes on.
Yeah.
What do I do?
You're going to extend the life of that asset. And now M&R is going to go up.
Way up. And downtime is going to go, and you're going to rent vehicles, and you're going to...
Availability is going to go down. Yep.
Everything suffers. Yep. And you're basically throwing your best practices out the window, not necessarily because you want to, but because you feel like you don't have another choice, right?
So kind of bringing this home, one of the best things about going to the show was at least being able to have that conversation.
Yes.
So some of the things that you miss out on, if you're not going to like Fleet Forward in this case, you missed an opportunity to have a really great conversation with Bruce and Chris and Bradley. I would have loved to have been on the fly on the wall.
Yeah.
We'll definitely want to get Bradley on here. And ideally, if we could get Chris and Bruce on, that would be amazing too.
Yeah, they're great guys. I'd like to think that they'd be willing to come and we could have
maybe they wouldn't go publicly on record. So I'll have to think about that. But
let me hit you with a couple of other quick ones too. So this one was interesting to me. Well, I think I got like 2 or 3 here. One is there was a gentleman there who was an expert, and forgive me, I lost his name, but he was an expert on reselling EVs. And it was he had some fascinating stuff. And let's just see if this plays out, okay? But what he claims is that the battery health data and the diagnostic data that they're seeing as these vehicles turn are much better than what was predicted for them to be. And so he believes that there's reason to think that that powertrains in the EV world are going to last like 500,000 miles consistently.
They're going to last a lot longer than they originally thought.
Correct.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. So let's see if that plays out, because obviously the focus of that conversation was, hey, we can't make the math work. They cost more and they sell for less. What gives? Yep. How are we going to fix that problem? So we'll see if that prediction plays out. Another one that was really kind of neat is I had a great conversation with Bill Schenkel, who most folks know as the president of NAFA. And this, again, we're just having lunch and we're talking. And some of the awesome work he's doing and NAFA's doing around, trying to help fleets find and attract and retain good talent, especially around technicians. And one of the interesting things that's popped up is because there's been such a shortage of technicians and there's such a demand for them is, as in the early days when he began to, and others began the efforts of connecting them to technical schools and trade schools.
Like the YOTechs and the UTIs.
Exactly right. What started to happen is, hey, you're pretty good. I have an open job now. Why are you going to school? I can just pay you. And essentially they start poaching students. Well, if you're an educational organization, having worked 20 years in one, I can tell you it's all about graduation rates. Yep. And these schools need these guys and gals to graduate.
Well, and they need the tuition from the following years of education.
Well, that's fair too, right? Otherwise, they fall apart, and then the whole thing falls apart. So it's fascinating some of the work that Bill is doing around, trying to kind of bridge that gap and saying to folks, hey, fleets, we know you need them, but either, let them finish school or incentivize them to finish school or figure it out, right? With your shifts. But I thought that was a pretty neat conversation that, the industry needs there, because we need more folks. We need more folks in skilled labor. We need more folks in the trades. And so that's certainly, kind of a big piece there that, I just thought I'd call that part out. So yeah, those are a couple of the few ones. There's a few more. But...
I know you mentioned like the EV consortium got up there.
Oh yeah,
right?
Thanks. That's a big one. Oof.
So I mean, it's interesting you talk about the battery is lasting longer, which we thought was going to be a big piece of the M&R pie.
Right.
Even if you take that piece of the M&R pie out, this was fascinating what they shared.
Yeah.
Which is something we've talked about on this podcast, and we've had people beat us up on LinkedIn about.
Right.
But the EV consortium, these are like as EV hardcore fans as you get.
Right. Yeah. What they have found is EVs cost more to maintain.
No. No way. Stop.
Now, certainly, I
don't believe it.
I'm going to try to caveat the same way, it's early in.
Here's the asterisk.
There's early in the data, and EVs are newer, and I older and all this other jazz. And I'm not saying any of that is untrue, but nonetheless, as we predicted here on the show, I know we said EVs are going to cost more before they cost less. We believe in the theory why they should ultimately cost less.
Yep.
But that hasn't played out yet, right? And we need to see that happen. We've seen them, we showed some math. We showed some hard data, I think, from KBB or Edmunds, right? That, in the subcompact world, you're going to see like 22-25% savings over the life. But it's
assuming you drive it more. The more you drive it,
you have to drive it more, right? And so that's where the biggest concern is in the data. It's from what I can tell. And I have pictures of these slides. So when people go ahead and challenge me, we'll see if I can get permission to post them. I don't know, but I will go to my grave if I have to. What's concerning to me is not only are EVs costing more, but they're costing more per mile. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting because the major driver of M&R is utilization, right? And that's true across any asset, frankly. But the whole value point of an EV is you need more utilization because you're trying to, that reduced operational cost from paying less in M&R and less in fuel is what's necessary to offset the increase in capital costs. So if you're seeing higher cost per miles, that's a concern, right?
Yeah, because then you're not going to be able to make that money back.
Correct. Now, I want to be clear. I also think it will begin to even out and peter out. I'm not one of these folks who are saying, no, EVs are going to cost more than ICE vehicles. I don't actually believe that. I believe this part of this is early data and we're figuring out technologies and so forth and so on. But what I will stand by is something we believe firmly is for these folks who are out there telling the world your M&R costs are going to be zero and you're going to make up all your capital cost money and all your infrastructure and it's all just going to go away because you got an EV. That's baloney, okay? As an EV owner, that is baloney, right? So the early returns are showing that our predictions are right. And again, you can check them out. And
the fuel savings are not offsetting the M&R increase
by enough. By enough, exactly. Okay. You still got higher TCOs, right? And again, there are factors in this. I'm not, but nonetheless, you can normalize for some of that stuff, right? And the reality is that's what the early returns are. So we're not so dumb after all, I guess, Josh.
I guess maybe they'll keep us around. I don't know. It must have felt good though.
Yes.
Based on what we've talked about, to have the EV consortium come up and say this on stage. You're like,
yes.
Preach.
Yes. And I give them credit. I want to give them a lot of credit too, because they were honest and they were transparent with the data. Now, again, we tried to explain why that's happening because it doesn't match the theory. Did they do that? Yes, they did. And that's okay. But they were honest and they showed the data right on screen as it was.
As we said at the beginning.
Yeah.
The data will set you free.
Exactly. So, I give them all the credit in the world.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, anything else stand out to you before we wrap?
I mean, I think those are the big ones. I think that was pretty neat. It's definitely, if you're like us and you're kind of tech geeks and you also like fleet, I got to say, I think it's a good match for maybe guys like you and I. So yeah, I thought it was a really good show. Hope to get back there again.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, as always, hopefully you guys got something out of that and just enjoyed the discussion.
Yep.
You're always a pleasure to talk to. But if you guys have any questions, feedback, we'd love to hear from you at podcast@rtafleet.com. Until next time.
Take care, everyone.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on LinkedIn or leave a review. Want to learn more about our fleet management software, Fleet 360? Check us out at rtafleet.com. If you want to learn more about having your fleet evaluated by our consulting team, go to fleetconsulting.com.